Been a few weeks since we've been able to look at Romans, but excited to get back into it with you. We're calling this study the Gospel of Transformation. And right now, we're in the middle of a section where Paul he's trying to humble us. He's gonna keep this up today and tomorrow. And then the terrible thing about this is that I'm going to be gone a couple Sundays from now, and so I get to be the bad cop, and then George gets to come in and be the good cop. He gets to get all the good stuff in the second half of chapter 3, and I have to miss that class, so I'm just only a little bit bitter about that, but it's okay. But excited to look at chapter 2 with you. Let's pray together before we begin. Father, we thank you so much for the day. Every day truly is a gift. And Father, your patience and loving kindness towards us is always a gift. And Father, we're thankful for your word, thankful for Paul's words that you preserve for us. And just, Father, help us to look at it, to understand it better than what we've understood before today, and to just take that into our hearts and try to live how you would have us do because of the message. Thank you so much for Jesus. We pray all these things in his name. Amen. Okay, well, it's been a little bit since we've been back in Romans, so let's start by trying to kind of refresh where we've been. Someone just really be brave, so just really jump out there and kind of catch me up. What is kind of a summary of what we've read so far in Romans? Who's going to take a swing at that? Just kind of a simple refresh of where we've been so far.
Bien, bueno, ha sido un poco desde que hemos estado de vuelta en Romanos. Así que vamos a empezar por tratar de tipo de refrescar donde hemos estado.
I'm very good at waiting.
Salten ahí y pónganme al día. ¿Cuál es el resumen de lo que hemos leído hasta ahora en Romanos? ¿Quién va a dar un golpe?
How did Paul start us in chapter 1?
Simple refresco.
George?
¿Cómo nos inició Pablo en el capítulo 1?
Okay, good.
Bien.
That's right. Yeah, that's what we're on right now. What does he do even before that? What does he do in chapter 1 before he kind of gets into the judgment section? What's Paul told us about this letter?
Sí, en eso estamos ahora. ¿Qué hace antes de eso? ¿Cómo hace? Estaba haciendo el capítulo 1 antes de entrar en la sección del juicio. ¿Qué nos ha dicho sobre esta carta?
He wants to substantiate his position as apostle, and his word didn't come from men, it came from God.
Quiere fundamentar su posición de apóstol y sus palabras que vienen de los hombres contra Dios.
Sure. Yeah, he opens up saying that he's an apostle, and if you kind of had to give one word, what is Paul talking about in this letter? It's a word that starts with a G, ends with ospel. Talking about the gospel, right? Yeah, it's how he opens up the letter. It's what he says in his thesis statement. Right? The gospel is the power of God to salvation for everybody, Jew and Gentile. Right? It revealed God's righteousness and the way that men can be faithful to Him. Right? I mean, Paul is writing about the gospel. Right? And so a part of this gospel message, though, as we've been seeing the last few weeks, as he starts in chapter 1, verse 18, is that God is a just God. He's a righteous God. That means he has to judge sin. And Paul's whole point has been, for the last few classes, continuing on throughout the first half of chapter 3, is going to be that everybody has sinned. And God is just and righteous to judge them. We said it this way in chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, in verse 32, Paul says that these people that do these type of things know that they deserve to die. And Paul wants us to see that we've all done those things. So we deserve to die. We deserve God's judgment. We're all sinners before God. That's Paul's big point right now in the letter. And so give me kind of a summary, though, of like chapter 1, 18 through the end of chapter 1. Paul is kind of pointing his finger at who? Gentiles, right? And then I said last class that when we get to 17, where we're going to be today, Paul is firmly going to be pointing his finger at who? Jews, yeah, and I kind of see our class last time sort of being a transition text, right? But chapter 1 is like the people that don't go to church, right? These are just the people of the world, right? These are people that are not Christians. These are people that don't care about God. Like, it's those people. And Paul says, you guys got a problem, right? What are the kind of people we started talking about in chapter 2 last time, though? Like, if chapter 1 is the rebels, What is chapter 2 kind of shifted towards?
Como si el capítulo 1 son los rebeldes. ¿Hacia dónde se dirige el capítulo
Yeah,
2?
it's the religious, right? Paul has condemned the rebels in chapter 1, but now he's condemning those that like sit in pews and like attend services. Maybe, right? We don't want to be that person. But Paul is saying, look, even those of you that are religious, you have some issues too, right? That could apply to a Jew, that could apply to a Gentile. But now as we get to verse 17, he's going to firmly start talking to the Jews, okay? Let's just go ahead and read the text first, and then we'll kind of go through some of our questions. So Romans chapter 2, beginning in verse 17. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. Okay. As you hear that, as you looked at that over the past couple weeks, tell me what stands out to you in our section today. What's interesting? What questions do you have? What stands out?
Al escuchar esto, al examinarlo durante las 2 últimas semanas, díganme qué les llama la atención de nuestra sección de hoy. ¿Qué es interesante? ¿Qué preguntas tiene? ¿Qué destaca?
Okay, so Paul is questioning their concept of the law. Yeah, give me a little more on that. What do you think? How would you kind of summarize that?
Sí, dame un poco más sobre eso. ¿Qué te parece?
Okay.
¿Cómo lo resumirías? De acuerdo.
Yeah, that's right. So Paul, he kind of already brought this concept up in our last class, right? Like he's already kind of talked about this in chapter 2, that the whole idea of just possessing the law isn't the thing. What is the thing in our last class? It's not just having the law, it's doing it, right? Like you got to do the law, right? He even comes out and he makes that statement in verse 6 that kind of surprises us that it's in Romans. You got to understand where he's saying it at, but he says he will render to each one according to his works, right? It's like it's not just having the law, it's actually doing the law. And so, yeah, an issue certainly for many Jews was, well, I'm good because I have it. I possess it, right? I have God's law, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what else? What else stands out?
Cierto, es como tú. No es solo tener la ley, es realmente hacer la ley y así. Sí, una cuestión ciertamente para muchos judíos era.
Yeah, yeah.
Yo soy bueno porque lo tengo. La poseo. Tengo la ley de Dios. Absolutamente.
Sure. Do you see Paul doing that contrast in this section? Like there's the outward thing, but then there's the inward thing, right? And it's not about the outward thing, right? Not only about the outward thing, maybe we should say it that way, right? Yeah, circumcision is something the Jews should have done, of course, right? But it wasn't just something that God wanted to happen externally. There was supposed to be an inward reality, right? Yeah, good. What else? What else stands out? David, yeah.
Sí, la circuncisión es algo que los judíos deberían haber hecho, por supuesto. Cierto, pero no era solo algo que Dios quería que sucediera externamente.
Saying, the law's been given to us, and then here's what you need to know about how it works. But then he says,
Juzgar el perdón
gives
de
a
la
very
ley,
specific example
y esto es
of,
lo que
you
necesitas
tell
saber
people
sobre
not to
cómo
steal.
funciona.
but yet you're stealing.
Pero luego dice,
And
¿quién lo tiene?
points out,
Es un
you know,
ejemplo
there's
muy
hypocrisy.
concreto.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Pero aún
So,
así
okay,
estás robando.
should the Jews have been
Exacto.
teachers?
Entonces vale. ¿Deberían los judíos haber sido
Should they have taught
maestros?
people? Absolutely,
Deberían haber
right?
enseñado.
So the issue is not, as David's kind of pointing out, the issue is not that they were just going around teaching people. What's the issue?
Absolutamente.
They weren't living it.
Así que
They
la
weren't living
cuestión
what
no
they
es,
taught,
como David
right?
está señalando.
And so Paul is going to
La
point
cuestión no es
out
que solo iban
the
por
big
ahí
issue
enseñando
with the
la
Jews here is their
¿Cuál es el problema?
hypocrisy, right? The problem isn't that they had the law. The problem isn't that they were teaching the
Todavía
law.
lo estaban viviendo.
The problem was
No
that they
estaban
weren't
viviendo
living
lo
what
que
they were
enseñaban,
teaching,
¿verdad?
right? It's one of
Y
the issues that he
entonces
points
Pablo
out.
va a
Good.
señalar que
Yeah.
el gran
Okay, what
problema
else?
con los judíos
What else
aquí
stands out?
es su
Yeah, Jamie.
hipocresía. Correcto. El problema no es que tenían la
He
ley.
says that
Sí, Jamie.
the name of God is being blasphemed among the Gentiles.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that. Okay.
Dice que el nombre de Dios blasfema
What's
entre
what's
los
special
gentiles.
about that statement?
Sí. Así que vamos a hablar de eso. De acuerdo. ¿Qué
You
tiene
call
de
other people
especial
sin,
esa
or you
maldición?
I say blaspheme God, you've got a bad reputation because of how you behave.
That's right. Yeah. So it matters how we live, not just for us, but for other people, right? And did Paul just kind of like come up with that statement in verse 24? Like where'd that come from?
He blasfemado contra Dios.
Yeah. So I'm hearing some Ezekiel's. Some of this could be tied to like Jeremiah, Ezekiel. They say similar things. But I think the most direct quote is actually from Isaiah 52:5. By the way, sometimes New Testament writers will quote a passage, and you'll go back and look at it in the Old Testament, and it doesn't like have the same exact words. And sometimes that's because they're quoting what we call the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation of the Old Testament. So there's a little different verbiage. And if you look at the Septuagint, this is pretty much straight out of Isaiah 52. Seems to be what Paul's doing. So I think it's an Isaiah 52:5 quote. Okay, but you're right. It's an Old Testament quote, right? He's quoting the Old Testament, a prophet. We're going to talk more about that when we get there. But what Paul has just said in that statement, as Jamie brought up, when Paul says that, what he's doing is saying, Jews, look at chapter 1. Look at all the things that the Gentiles did. Who is at least in part at fault for that? The Jews. Do you think that would be crazy talk in the first century? Like it's my fault that you guys are doing that? Now, we understand everyone is individually accountable. It's like Paul's whole point here, right? But Paul also adds, look, the Gentiles are blaspheming God partly because of you. Because you were hypocritical, right? Okay, all right, what else stands out, or what else do we want to bring up about this section?
Back to the previous verse, he says, you're dishonoring God.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. So, kind of at the beginning of this section in 17, he says, you rely on the law and you boast in God, right? But then you get down to 23, and he says, he says you boast in the law, and you actually do what to God? You dishonor God. So they were boasting in God, but yet the reality was they were really dishonoring Him, right? They had this mind that I'm actually pleasing God when actually they weren't at all. And we're going to try to get to the bottom of kind of why that was. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so what key words did you mark? What words kept coming up again and again in this section? You, yeah. So as far as pronoun here, you, right? And again, he's pointing directly at the Jew now, right? He tells us that in verse 17. So I've talked to the Gentiles, I've talked to like religious people in general, and now I'm talking to you, Jew. Like no mistake. Yep. Good. What else? Law. Does that make sense? Since Paul's talking to a Jew? Yeah, makes a lot of sense. He's talking about law. All right. What else? Yeah, knowledge comes up. I wrote that about 3 times, maybe not always the same word, but the idea of of knowledge comes up. But then also along with that, obedience comes up about 3 times, right? So yeah, knowledge and obedience are both there. What else is, so law comes up, I counted 10. What else comes up about 10 times? Circumcision and uncircumcision, right? Yeah, okay. Paul is talking to Jews, and it makes sense that he's talking about law and circumcision, right? Law and circumcision, okay? Now, why is Paul bringing up law and circumcision? What is the Jews' issue with law and circumcision in this text?
más aparece 10 veces. Con la ley y la circuncisión en
Okay.
este texto, ¿base? De acuerdo.
Yeah. Yeah. So, 100% spot on. Yeah, absolutely. How would you kind of phrase it? What are they doing with the law? Because as Bruce said, like they have it, but it hasn't changed them internally. Like, what are they doing with the law, and what are they doing with circumcision?
Well,
Así
it
que
was a
si el-
Jewish law that
Sí,
all
absolutamente.
males had to
¿Cómo
be
lo expresarías?
circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
¿Qué están haciendo
And
con
so
la ley?
that's kind of what they're
Porque como
going
dijo
by.
Bruce,
Sure. Yeah, it was commanded, right? It's not that they shouldn't have, put stock in the law. It's not that they shouldn't have been circumcised. That's right. But what are they doing
eso
with
es lo
that?
que buscan.
What are they
Claro,
doing with the law?
sí,
What are they doing with
ordenar,
circumcision?
¿verdad? No es que no deberían haberlo hecho. Sí, hay que creer en la ley.
So,
No es que no debieran
did you
haberlo
notice that the word boast comes up twice?
hecho. ¿Qué hacen con la ley?
Yeah, the idea of boasting is I'm prideful. I think I'm better, right? So one thing they did with the law and circumcision is said, I'm better than you because I have it, right? 100%. Yeah. How else would you kind of phrase that? What are they doing with the law, and what are they doing with circumcision?
Así es. Así que una cosa que hicieron con la ley y la
Maybe
circuncisión
we
es
could
que
say,
yo
how are
soy
they
mejor
abusing
que
it?
porque la tengo. 100. Sí. ¿De qué otra forma lo expresarías? ¿Qué hacen con la ley y con la
Yeah,
circuncisión?
right. So it's hypocritical, right? It's like I have it, but they don't really have it, right? It's like I'm instructed by the law, but I'm not really instructed by the law. And I'm circumcised, but I'm not really circumcised, right? So it's kind of this front that they use, that they were using, even though they weren't actually changed by it.
Pero ellos no lo tienen realmente.
The way that I think about this section is that Paul is giving us two things that the Jews place their security in. There's two sources of security that the Jews had.
Sí, claro.
One,
Así que es
the
una
law.
especie de fachada que
Two,
usan que estaban usando,
circumcision.
a pesar de
You with
que en
me?
realidad no
All right?
fueron cambiadas.
The first thing he talks about is the law in verse 17. If you call yourself a Jew and
Los judíos ponen sus
what on the law? What's the next word? If you call yourself a Jew and rely, is there any other translation? Does everybody say rely?
la ley. Dos, la circuncisión.
Rest?
Estás
What
conmigo.
version is that? What says rest?
Lo primero
Yeah,
de lo que
that's
habla
good.
es de
Yeah,
la
anything else? Rely,
En el
rest?
versículo 17,
Yeah. Do you get the imagery? Like they're relying on it.
¿cuál es la siguiente
I'm
palabra?
resting in it. Like I got the law, and so I can just, I'm good, right?
¿Qué versión es
Like
esa?
Paul is looking at the Jew and saying, what is the reason you think you're good before God? Like, why are you good? And the Jew would answer, well, because I got the law.
¿Entiendes
Like,
las
that's why I'm good.
imágenes?
You see, it was a false sense of security.
Estoy
So the first one he brings up is law.
descansando en la ley.
I'm just going to give you a little breakdown of what I'm seeing him doing here.
Mira al judío y le dice,
Look at verses 17 and 18.
ante Dios.
And I want you to see how Paul, in those first two verses, kind of shows us that this was their identity. Notice the language. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you're instructed from the law, then he's going to move on. You see, that's language of identity. This is, I'm a Jew because I have the law.
Y confías en la ley.
I'm a Jew and I'm right with God because I'm instructed by the law. I possess the truth, as we brought up earlier, right? They thought I was good. They thought they were good because I possessed the law, right?
¿Ves? Eso es.
However, he shifts in verse 19,
Esto es.
and then he starts talking about
Soy
their
judío y
mission,
estoy bien con Dios.
right? Because then he says in 19, if you're sure you're
Sin embargo,
yourself are a guide to the blind and a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment and the knowledge of truth. You see, they saw themselves as teachers of the law, right? Again, were they supposed to be teachers? They were. They were. Yeah. They were supposed to possess the truth. They were supposed to teach the truth. But then Paul brings in the problem, starting in verse 21. What's the problem? Because they have it, and they teach it, but again, they don't do it. They don't do it. They're hypocritical, right? And so what he shows us in 21 through 24 is that even though they possess it and they teach it, they break it. They break it. That word comes up twice in the ESV. They're breakers, right? They break the law, okay? So he also shows us Jewish hypocrisy, right? So we see that, and that's pretty clear. Tell me why, if you're a Jew in the first century, like why was it tempting to put your security in the
Dime
law?
por qué si usted es un judío en el
Why
primer
was it tempting to say, I possess the law and therefore I'm right with God?
pone
Okay.
su seguridad
Give me
en
more.
la ley.
Tradition?
¿Por qué era tentador decir que poseo la ley? Por lo tanto
They
estoy
go
bien con
all the
Dios.
way back to Abraham to promise
Dame
me
más
to them, and
tradición.
they're the seed of Abraham, so to them, they are God's chosen people.
Yeah, it's affiliation,
Les dijo, soy
right?
un pueblo elegido
Like
de Dios.
possessing the law in the Jewish mind is like that connects me to Abraham, right? I mean, that seems like a pretty decent conclusion if you're a first century Jew. Like, I possess the law, I'm an Israelite, therefore I'm connected to Abraham, right? Yeah, 100%. Get another, yeah,
Quiero
Jay.
decir, eso parece una conclusión.
Okay, yeah, it makes me holy because you don't have it,
Como
right?
poseo la ley.
I'm different than you
Por
because
lo tanto,
I have the
estoy
law,
conectado a Abraham.
right? Now, was that actually true that they were different because they had the
Diferente
law?
a ti porque tengo la ley, ¿verdad?
Paul's trying to get us to see that the answer is no. Like, they're not different from the Gentiles. Paul's actually trying to get us to see that the Jew, like, they're actually like on the same playing field as the Gentiles, right? Because just possessing the law doesn't make you a holy nation. What makes you a holy nation?
Judío, como que son en realidad como en el mismo campo de juego como
Not
los
just
gentiles,
possessing it,
¿verdad? Porque solo poseer
obeying
la
it,
ley no te
doing it,
convierte en una nación
right?
santa.
But you could see in the Jewish mind that, okay, how many other nations did God give his law to? Like the law of Moses. How many other nations
Puedes
got
ver
it?
en la mente judía que vale a
Nobody.
todas las otras naciones
Nobody, right? He gave it to Israel,
como la
right?
ley de
He gave
Moisés,
the law of Moses to Israel. They were a special nation. And so the Jew looked and thought, God gave his law to me, to my family, to my heritage. I possess the law. Therefore, I know I'm right with God. All right,
nadie,
next question.
se la
Did the
dio a Israel,
Jews have the right
le dio la
teaching,
ley de Moisés
like
a
the
Israel.
correct law?
Ellos eran una nación especial.
Like, did they possess
El
the
judío
correct law?
miraba y pensaba, Dios me dio
They
su ley
did,
a mí, a
right?
mi familia,
Yeah,
a
God
mi
gave them
herencia.
his law. It was his law.
Poseo la ley.
It was good,
Por lo
right?
tanto, sé que
Was
soy
it good for them, as Paul will say in
Dios les dio su ley.
verse 18? Was it good for them to be instructed from that law?
Fue bueno para ellos, como Pablo dirá en
100%.
el versículo 18.
Was it good for them to listen to preachers that were preaching the law of Moses? It was.
100. ¿Era bueno para ellos escuchar a los predicadores que predicaban la ley de Moisés?
So, how does that become a false source of security?
Predicadores. Entonces, ¿cómo se convierte eso en una falsa fuente de seguridad?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Sí, claro.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, so
Sí, claro.
let me ask you this way. Should a Jew have, like, on Saturday, on the Sabbath, should they have went over to, like, a Gentile camp and listened to their preaching on Saturday?
Sí.
No, like, should they have been in Israel and listened to Moses'
Debería un
preaching?
judío, como el sábado,
Sure.
en el
Hey,
sábado,
that was the right thing. Like, I should be instructed by the
un
law.
campamento gentil y escuchar su
How did that
predicación
become a
el sábado.
false source of security, though?
Claro. Oye, eso fue
Because they're listening to the right law.
como debería ser instruido por la ley.
But
Porque están escuchando
how
la
does
ley
that alone
correcta.
not make you a child of God?
¿Cómo es que eso por sí solo no te convierte en hijo
You're
de
not
Dios?
obeying and following. I know I've said it like 20 times, and I'm going to keep saying it because Paul keeps saying it.
No estás obedeciendo y siguiendo. Sé que lo
Where
he
should
dicho
you be
como
this
20
Sunday?
veces, y voy a seguir diciéndolo porque Pablo sigue
I think
diciendo,
you should be here. I think we're trying to follow God. Like, I think we're really trying to look at the text and just try to do what God said. Like, we got the right law,
creo que deberías estar
right? Like, this is the right book.
yo creo que estamos
And we're trying to
tratando
teach
de
it.
Dios.
To the best of our ability, we're trying to
Creo que
teach it like
realmente estamos
He wants us
tratando
to
de
teach
mirar
it.
el texto y solo tratar de
But
hacerlo como
that's
Dios
not
dijo.
the only place our security comes from. Right? Like, I don't know that I'm good with God because I came to this building.
Este es el libro
And I don't know that I'm good with God just because the preacher is preaching the right things. And I don't know that I don't have my security that I'm good with God just because I
pero ese
possess
no es
the
el
law.
único lugar de donde viene nuestra seguridad.
Where does security come from? According to Paul right now.
Yo no sé que soy bueno con Dios porque
Yeah,
me
it's
hace
obedient faith,
Yo no
right?
sé que
It's
soy
doing the
bueno con
law,
Dios solo
right?
porque el predicador está
So
predicando
just
las
because,
cosas correctas.
right, we got the
Y
right
yo no sé que
sign
no
and the
tengo
right
seguridad
building,
de
and
soy
just because we're
bueno con
teaching the
Dios
right
solo
things, that's all
porque
good,
poseo
right?
la ley.
Was it good for the Jews to
Solo
teach the
tienen
law of Moses?
seguridad.
It was. That was good. They needed to do it.
Según Pablo ahora mismo,
But that's not
sí
the
es
ultimate
la
place where their
pura
security
obediencia,
should have
¿verdad?
been.
Es hacer
It
la
was
ley.
in them being
Así
faithful
que
to
solo
it.
porque a la
Everybody with me?
derecha tenemos el
Yep.
signo correcto.
So that's how the law became a false source of security, because I have it,
Todo eso es bueno.
and I'm teaching the right thing, and you might even be teaching the right thing,
Moisés,
but are you
ese no
following
es
it?
el lugar
Right?
definitivo
That's where the
donde
security
debería
comes
haber
from.
estado
All
su
right, questions,
seguridad.
comments about, that's kind of verses 17 through 24. We're going to talk about Isaiah in just a second, but other comments? Yeah,
Que yo la
Jamie.
tengo y
I
estoy
like
enseñando
what he
lo
says
correcto.
in verse,
Puede que incluso estés enseñando lo correcto,
verse 21.
pero no estás
You
siguiendo.
then who teach others,
De ahí
do
viene
you
la
not teach yourself?
Yeah, yeah,
You know, are you paying attention to what you're saying?
Sure.
Do you even understand what you're saying?
Hablaremos de
Sure.
Isaías en un
yeah.
segundo, pero otros
Who's the first person that a teacher needs to teach?
lo que dice en el versículo 16.
Themselves, right? Yeah, Jay.
Verso 20 de enseñas a
Sure.
otros y no te enseñas a ti mismo.
Yes.
You
Sí,
who
estás
abhor
prestando
idols, do
Yeah.
not love temples.
Yeah.
What
¿Qué
is
estás
the
diciendo? ¿Quién es la
is he
primera
saying
persona que un
because
maestro
of your
necesita para enseñar a sí mismo?
arrogance, you're keeping back, giving to
Jason,
God
sí,
your tithes, and therefore you're worshiping yourself and your needs? Is that what he's getting at? I mean, what's the trade-off?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you kind of comb through commentaries, there's a lot of different opinions on what Paul means by that. So, like, one option could be when he says, you abhor idols, do you rob temples? Like, what's one possibility that the Jews were doing? Like, maybe they were actually robbing temples, right? Like, physically robbing a temple. There's even some stories out of the first century where they weren't necessarily robbing directly out of a temple, but there was, like, someone that possessed money that was going to be given to a temple, and they stole the money, right? There's, like, documented times where Jews did that. So it could be like a physical act like that, where they're, like, kind of literally robbing from a temple. Or it could be more, yeah, something of, okay, are you taking something from God? You teach that you don't follow idols, but is there really an idol in your life? It could be more of that type of route. I think it's hard to kind of nail down exactly what Paul means by that. But he is clearly meaning that there's something hypocritical going on, right? Like, you condemn idolatry, but then there's a way that you're doing the very same thing, right? Whether you're taking part in the idolatry or whether you're stealing from a temple that has idols, right? So, yeah, I think there's a couple possibilities there. Yeah.
Creo que es difícil precisar exactamente lo que Pablo quiere decir con eso.
Sure, sure. That's right.
Sí, claro.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe it's an actual physical idol was an issue. That's right.
Sí,
Um,
así es.
But yes, to Jamie's point, as he pointed out, the teacher must first teach himself, right? The teacher must first teach
Así es.
himself.
Pero
And because they didn't do that, verse 24, he says, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, right? Right out of Isaiah 52, verse 5, right? And that is a text. So Isaiah 52 is right before what chapter? Isaiah 53. That's right. So the Jews they identified themselves as the law possessors. We got the law, right? Here in Isaiah, he identifies Israel as a bunch of people that blaspheme God's name. They cause people to blaspheme God's name. Like, that's your identity, Israel. You're a bunch of people that causes other people to blaspheme God, right? A bunch of blasphemers. However, in Isaiah 52, God is telling the people that there's good news coming, right? We've talked about Isaiah 52:7 a little bit in some of these sermons the past few weeks. Like, good news is coming. God's coming back. He's going to restore Israel. How is he going to do that? Isaiah 53. How's he going to restore Israel? All these blasphemers. Through the servant. Through the servant. So, like, even back then in Isaiah's day, there was a deep need for the Jews to have the servant, right? Like, they boasted in having the law, but they needed a Savior, right? Where are the Jews at in the first century that Paul's writing to? The same place. They are boasting in the law, but they need a Savior. And because of their actions, even though they have the law, they've really not become the people that honor God. They've become God's embarrassment, right? Like, the Jews are looking at themselves with the law and saying, like, we're good, we got this, and God is trying to tell them, you do not got this, you are not good, just because you possess the law. And in fact, people blaspheme God because of it. Look at one other text. So, I don't think Paul is quoting this text, but it's in alignment with it. Look over at Jeremiah chapter 7. I think this kind of illustrates what Paul is talking about in this chapter well. Get Jeremiah chapter 7. We're going to pick up in verse 9. When we read this, you might recognize that it's quoted in the New Testament several times by Jesus. Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 9. This is judgment language against the nation of Israel. They are not following him, but they still think that they kind of are. They kind of think that God's still on their side. And notice what Jeremiah says then. We'll just pick up in verse 8. Jeremiah 7, verse 8. Behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. You who steal, will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord. You see what Jeremiah is telling the people? He's saying, look, well, let me ask you. Okay, so they're living how they should not live, right? Right? All these accusations, you steal, you murder, you commit adultery, you have these idols. Same thing Paul's talking about in Romans 2, right? But why in Jeremiah 7, why do they think everything's good? Why do they think they're delivered? Like, what's the place they're standing in? Verse 10. They come and stand where? That's right, the temple, his house. And then again, verse 11. Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers? Remember when Jesus quotes this passage? What's he doing in the New Testament? Yeah, he's cleansing the temple, right? What the Jews had done is they made their temple a source of security. He says, you're making my house like a den of robbers. Here's the idea. Long, windy roads in Israel, right, going up hills. And like the robbers would come out and rob you and steal, and then they would go back to their den, their cave, right? The cave was a place of security, of safety, right? We're safe and secure in our den, and it allows us to come out and steal and commit all these evil acts. And then we get to go back to the security of our cave. God tells the Israelites, you've done that with my temple. Like you're standing in my house and in my temple, and the only reason you're doing that is to stay safe so you can go out and do all these evil things, right? You've made the temple into a den of robbers, okay? Their security was in the temple. You see it? Like they thought, we have the temple. Like this is God's temple. This is God's house, and we have it, and I'm in it, and so therefore, I'm good, right? It's the same thing they were doing with the law. It's the same thing Paul is about to say they're going to do with circumcision, right? They're putting the security in something that's external. I have the temple, therefore, I'm right with God. And there's no internal change. Right, everybody see that? Questions or comments about that? So, in that first section in verses 17 through 24, if you kind of had to sum it up, what are kind of the big, what are the big sins that the Jews are committing? What's their big problem? If you had to kind of give it one word. Hypocrisy. Yeah. Practice what you preach. Yeah. Hypocrisy. Pride. Right? Prideful hypocrisy. Right? Okay. All right. Now, then he transitions in verse 25 and he starts talking about what? Primarily, yeah, circumcision. He starts talking about circumcision. So if one answer that the Jew gave when asked, why are you good with God? If one answer is, I have the law, Paul's addressed that, right? That doesn't work because you're not following it. Another answer they might give of why are you good with God, the Jew would say, because I'm circumcised. I have, here it is, the irony, the wedding ring. I literally noticed that right in the middle of the sermon. I didn't have my wedding ring. I have my wedding ring. Like, why are you married? Well, I got the proof right here, right? I have my wedding ring. And Paul is saying that's not it. Like, that's a false sense of security. Just because you're circumcised, just because you have the external thing, doesn't mean then you're actually faithful to God. It's not just about the externals, it's about the internals, okay? So did you notice how, like in verse 25, and then 26, and then 27, what's Paul calling the Jews to do? he kind of says it in slightly three different ways, but I think he's saying the same thing. Verse 25, 26, 27, what is he asking them to do?
Lo dice de tres maneras diferentes.
Keep the law.
Está diciendo lo
Yeah.
mismo.
Verse 25, the ESV says, if you obey the law.
6:27.
Verse 26, if you keep the precepts of the law. Verse 27, but keep the law, right? That's actually interesting if you kind of look at those words. They have the connotation of practicing and guarding and accomplishing. Paul uses three different words there. But the idea is, it's not just about circumcision, it's about actually keeping the law, right? Now again, help me through, if I'm a first century Jew, like why was that a struggle for me? If we're talking about circumcision as this sense of security, like where's the temptation to think I'm good just because of circumcision? Like what was the logic for the Jew?
Ahora de nuevo, ayúdame a través de. Si soy un judío del primer siglo, ¿por qué fue una lucha para mí? Hablaban de la circuncisión en un sentido de.
I did follow a command,
¿Dónde está la
right?
tentación?
Like I did obey. In one sense, to some extent, I did obey God. Like I got circumcised like he asked me to do,
Hubiera
right?
obedecido.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
En cierto
Yeah.
sentido.
What else would be in the
Hasta
Jew's mind?
cierto punto, si
Why
obedezco,
does circumcision,
como que me
like why does that,
circuncido como él me lo
why does that make me
pidió,
good?
¿verdad?
Because that makes them
¿Por qué la
special, they're God's
circuncisión?
people.
It makes me different than other people,
¿Por qué me hace oír
right? Like I'm circumcised and they're not,
más?
right? I have something that they don't have. I identify with God in a way that they don't, so therefore I must be okay because I'm different,
Correcto. Tengo
right?
algo que
What else,
ellos no tienen.
Jamie?
Me
Go back to
identifico con
John
Dios de
the
manera
Baptist's
que
point.
ellos no. Así
That
que por lo tanto
don't
debo estar
claim
bien.
being a descendant of Abraham is going to help you. Well, that's what, to them,
Abraham te va a ayudar.
circumcision has become. It makes me a descendant of Abraham.
That's exactly right. So something that I think is key for Paul in the letter to the Galatians and the letter to Romans, he's answering this question, and the question is, who is a child of Abraham? Who is really a child of Abraham? I want you to notice in this text, Paul doesn't say being a Jew doesn't matter at all.
He
doesn't say that. He doesn't say quit being worried about being a Jew, understanding accommodatively how we're saying that, right? He ends up saying in verse 28, here's who a real Jew is, right? So in a spiritual sense, right, you do need to be a Jew. You do need to be a child of Abraham. What was the Jews' problem? Because they needed to be a child of Abraham. But how did they think you accomplished that? Like what made me a child of Abraham? And being circumcised, and just as Jamie said, as John the Baptist said, physical descent, right? Like I'm physically a child of Abraham. And Paul is trying to get us to see you do have to be a child of Abraham. The promises come through Abraham. That's why he's going to go to where he goes in chapter 4. He's going to bring up Abraham on purpose because you have to be connected to Abraham. But it's not through physical descent. It's through faith, right? It's through faithfulness to God, right? But the Jew thought, yeah, I have the law and I'm circumcised and I have the right bloodline, therefore I'm a child of Abraham. Therefore I'm good with God, right? And I'm different than them, right? So this sense of security in circumcision, Paul brings up, here's the real value in circumcision in verses 25 through 27. And the value is actually being loyal to what the sign represents, right? Just like the wedding ring, right? If someone asks me, are you faithful to your wife? Like I can't say yes just because I'm wearing the ring. Like if I am currently practicing unfaithfulness towards my wife, like the ring does not matter anymore. And that's Paul's point with circumcision. The circumcision is good, it mattered, God told you to do it, but just because you have the sign doesn't mean you're actually faithful to God. Like you actually have to practice it, right? And so the value of circumcision is the loyalty that it's supposed to represent. And then he talks about the location of where the circumcision is really supposed to be. And it's not just something that's external, right? It's something that's internal. Paul redefines who a Jew is in verse 28. He says, for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. What do you mean, Paul? It really seems like it's outward and physical. Well, Moses told us all the way back in Deuteronomy. It was about the circumcision of your heart. And so he says, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit. Right? So remember what Paul said back in verse 17, but if you call yourself a
Mentalidad
Jew,
del corazón. Y así
right?
él dice, pero un judío
He's
es
saying
un
if you
inferior
really
al
want to
otro,
call yourself
y
a
la
Jew, there has to be
circuncisión es un
something
asunto del
different
corazón
inside,
por el
not
Espíritu.
just outside.
Así que
Right?
recuerda lo que Pablo dijo en el
Modern day
versículo
application,
17.
right?
Pero
If we
si te
call
llamas a ti
ourselves a
mismo,
Christian, like it's not just having the
está
externals.
diciendo que si realmente quieres
It's not
llamarte
just
judío,
having the right
tiene
law
que haber
and
algo
being in the
diferente
right
dentro,
place
no solo
and
fuera de
hearing
la
the right
aplicación
things.
moderna.
It's
Así
about
es,
being
si nos
changed
llamamos cristianos,
internally.
no
Everybody
se
with me on
trata
that?
solo de tener la ley
That's what Paul's
adecuada,
trying to get these Jews
estar
to
en el
see.
lugar adecuado,
And
y
so
hacer las cosas
circumcision
correctas.
it's all about the
Todo
loyalty
esto
that it
conmigo,
represents. Circumcision is all
así que
about the
Paul está
internal
tratando de conseguir
change.
esos puntos de vista
And I
para
want you to notice what he
y así la
says
circuncisión es todo
in
acerca de la lealtad que
verse.
representa la circuncisión, es todo
I gotta go
acerca
back and
del
find it
cambio
now.
interno. Y quiero que te fijes en lo que dice en el versículo.
Verse 26.
Me
He
dice,
says, "So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his circumcision be regarded
así que si un hombre
as
que es
circumcision?"
incircunciso guarda los preceptos de la ley,
And then he says in verse 27, "Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and break circumcision." By the way, you see the two
luego
things they have
dice en el
security
verso
in verse 27 there,
entonces
the
el
written
que es
code and
físicamente
circumcision.
incircunciso, pero
But
guarda
what
la
is
ley,
Paul saying in verse
guarda
26 and
vosotros
27?
tenéis el
How
código.
is a Jew condemned by a
Romper la
Gentile?
circuncisión. Por cierto, usted ve las dos cosas que
How
tienen
is that
seguridad
possible?
en el verso
Because that's
27.
crazy talk for a Jew in the
El
first century.
código escrito y la circuncisión. ¿Ese? ¿Cómo es posible? Porque eso es una locura para un judío
right.
del primer siglo.
Paul is saying that there's those with less that can condemn
Pablo
you,
está
Jew.
diciendo que hay quienes tienen menos,
There's those that don't actually have the law of Moses like you have, but yet they can
eso
condemn
te
you.
puede condenar.
There's those that weren't given this amazing sign from God,
Pero aún así pueden
that
condenar.
don't have this sign of
Hay
circumcision,
quienes
yet
no
they can
recibieron
condemn
esta
you.
señal asombrosa de
right?
Dios, que no tienen esta señal de la circuncisión. Sin
So there
embargo,
might be
pueden
times
condenar.
when, like new Christians,
Así que puede haber momentos en los
might be
que,
able to condemn mature Christians.
como
There
si
might
los
be times
cristianos
when
no
Christians who are
pudieran
converted
condenar a
from
los
like
cristianos maduros.
improper teaching can actually condemn those who have had proper teaching their whole life. There's times when Christians in foreign countries where they can't even read
La enseñanza
could
inadecuada en
condemn
realidad
Christians in
puede
America.
condenar a los que han tenido la
How does it
enseñanza
happen?
adecuada toda su vida.
How's that
Hay
possible?
veces en que los cristianos de países extranjeros
I mean, they
donde
can't
ni
even
siquiera
read.
saben leer podrían condenar a
They
los
were taught the wrong
cristianos.
thing for most of their life.
¿Cómo es
They're
posible?
brand new at being a Christian. How could they ever condemn a mature Christian
Les enseñaron lo incorrecto durante la mayor parte
if
de
the
su
mature
vida.
Christian's not living it?
Son nuevos
right?
en ser cristianos.
See, Paul is trying to get us to see where our security comes from. And it's not heritage, and it's not affiliation. All those things are good. Being a Jew was good. Being circumcised was good. It was right. But that's not where your security is. Our security is being changed internally, right? That's what defines a Jew. A Jew is one that is changed on the inside. Who is a child of Abraham? Not just a physical Jew, but those that have a circumcised heart. Okay. All right, questions or comments or anything that you see kind of in that last section, 25 through 29. We want to add to that, Bruce.
De acuerdo. Preguntas o comentarios o cualquier cosa que veas en esa última sección
and
25
aren't
a
living right
29.
now. And I
Queremos
have,
añadir a eso.
I have conversations with them, and they say, but I was baptized.
Mhm.
And I think it's this,
Y tienen
we can be
conversaciones.
guilty of the same
Sure.
sin.
Pero fui
Sure.
bautizado.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we could say, hey, I did the thing, right? And I have this thing that gives me security because I was baptized. Paul's answer to us would be,
Creo que esto es
are
culpable
you
del
living like you're
mismo.
baptized?
Así
Right?
es.
The Jew is circumcised, but
Sí,
are you living like
podemos
you're
decir,
circumcised?
Oye, yo,
Exactly right.
yo hice la cosa,
George.
¿verdad? Y tengo esta cosa que me da seguridad porque fui bautizado. Exacto. Nuestro. Seguridad.
Sure.
Así es. Cierto.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah.
Claro. Sí.
Mhm.
Porque sí. Tienen todo esto. Cosas
Exactly right.
externas.
Yeah, again, was it right for a Jew to be circumcised?
Sí.
Is it right
De
for us to
nuevo,
observe
¿era
the Lord's
correcto
Supper every
para un
week?
judío ser circuncidado?
Yeah. Is it right to
¿Es
worship the way
correcto
that we're
que
trying to worship?
celebremos la
Yes.
cena del Señor
Yeah,
todas
but
las
that's not,
semanas?
we don't have security because I'm different than them and I'm not doing what they're doing and they're not doing what like my security is God has changed my heart and I'm following him. I'm faithful to him.
Sí,
Right?
hay derecho a
Exactly
rendir
right.
culto
Yeah,
de la forma
good.
en
Other
que
thoughts
lo
about that?
hacemos. Sí, eso no. No tenemos
Yeah,
seguridad
so
de
Paul
que soy
continues
de ellos. No
to
estoy haciendo
tell
lo
the
que
Jews in
ellos
this
están
section,
haciendo, y ellos no
don't
están
rely
haciendo
on
lo
false
que
assurances,
es Dios el
and
que
it's
habla
not
y
just
soy
about
yo el
knowing
que lo
what's
estoy siguiendo.
wrong,
Bien,
it's about doing what's
bien.
right.
Otros
But
pensamientos
here's the
son
sad
estos.
reality in this
Sí,
section of the
así
book.
que Pablo
Paul's
sigue
really
diciendo los
larger point
comentarios.
is how many
No
people have
confíen en
actually done what's
falsas
right?
seguridades. No se trata solo de
Like
saber lo que
nobody.
está mal.
Nobody's done it,
Se
right?
trata de hacer lo correcto.
So Paul's going to
Pero
continue
aquí está la
to
triste
salt us.
realidad
We're going
de
to
esta
continue to be
sección del
salted.
libro. El tiempo
And
más
George is going to
importante
swoop
de
in and
Pablo
he's
es
going to
cuánta
give us
gente
the
ha
water
hecho lo correcto.
in a couple of weeks. We got one more week of humbling us next week. And then Paul's finally he's going to get you to the point in chapter 3, the latter half of chapter 3, where you were begging for Jesus. Like, I have to have him. Because, like, the rebels have no chance, and religious people, like, we mess it up too, and, like, we all need Jesus. That's where he's getting us to. So, yeah.
Él va a darnos el agua en un par de semanas. Tenemos una semana más de
That's right.
humillarnos la
Yeah.
próxima
You
semana.
can't appreciate your need for Jesus until you see that you have done, like, the same things the Jews have, and the same thing the Gentiles have. That's right. All right, thank you for class. We're going to wrap up there.
Como tengo que tenerlo. El nombre que usted no puede